announcement. The Saturday lunch with Tom Hopkins Burke will begin shortly. Thank you.
10, 9, 8, 7, 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1.
Live from Nottingham, this is the Saturday Lunch with Tom Hopkins Burke on Teachers Talk Radio.
Hey up, look, it's Saturday, it's 1 p.m, and this is the Saturday Lunch with Tom Hopkins Burke. We are back today for another 90 minutes, this time looking at results days and workplace romance. This is your show, so give me your views, listening, texting, and calling to share your thoughts on the show. Tune in, talk it out, live on Podbean. This is Teachers Talk Radio.
Live from Nottingham, this is the Saturday Lunch with Tom Hopkins Burke on Teachers Talk Radio. Tune in live on the Podbean app or desktop player. Just head over to www.podbean.com/LSW/TT Radio or search Teachers Talk Radio. Follow the hashtag TT Radio.
We are live and we are ready to go. Welcome to the Saturday Lunch on Teachers Talk Radio. My name is Tom Hopkins Burke, and today it's the 14th of August, so by my count that is 17 days until I am back at work. I am double jabbed, hooray. I had my second Pfizer dose yesterday afternoon, less than 24 hours ago, and so far I feel great. So I'm glad I am able to host this afternoon. Last week I discussed three things. Firstly, how do we get seating plans right in September? Can we get them right? Should students be allowed to sit where they like? How often should we change them? And should we move away from seating students by gender? I also talked about my experiences with Latin and the Latin Excellence Programme being rolled out in 40 schools by the government. And I also dissected the question about whether some teachers have a so-called X factor that separates them from their peers, and if so, whether that's down to nature or nurture. I came to some interesting conclusions. So once you've finished with me today, why not listen back to find out what they were? Today's show comes in two very different looking parts. In part one, I dissect the facts and figures for the GCSE and A-level results days. Should the widening attainment gaps worry us? And what should happen to exams next year? Part two, those about workplace romance. Is it really worth the hassle? You can share your thoughts on the show live using the Podbean app. The Saturday Lunch is live every Saturday between 1 and 2:30 p.m. And you can text in your views or call in to make your voice heard by clicking on one of the call-in icons. We are live streaming this show via Twitter, Facebook, and YouTube. If you're listening via Twitter, Facebook, or YouTube, then a very good afternoon to you. And of course, if you're listening back via our website, ttradio.org/listen back, via Podbean, via Spotify, or via Apple Podcasts, then a warm welcome to you today. Your best listening back experience is through the Teachers Talk Radio website, because you can use that search bar to find shows which suit your interests. It's a fantastic form of CPD. However, if you want to interact directly with myself and with today's guests, then download the Podbean app, subscribe to Teachers Talk Radio, and get calling in and texting in. Please also tweet us at TTRadio2021 with the hashtag TTRadio with your thoughts on the show, whether you're listening live or listening back. I always look forward to reading your comments. And a reminder about the new feature on Podbean. Look down to the bottom right of your screen. You should be able to see one of two things just above the present box animation. There will either be a love heart, or probably not yet for you, you will have a countdown timer. Once that countdown timer is over, you'll be able to see a heart. And if you press that heart, you'll be sending a like to the show. So let me know that you are liking the show by pressing that button. You can then like the show every 5 minutes while you are listening live. I don't get notified after the first like, but It helps you climb the rankings of the most loyal Teachers Talk Radio listeners. And at the moment this month, I think I'm currently in competition with Tom Rogers for top spot. And of course, if you're not listening live and you have no idea what these countdown times or hearts are because you can't see them, then get in that Podbean studio every Saturday between 1 and 2:30 p.m. You can call in, text in and make your voice heard because it is talk radio and I want to hear from you. If you have thoughts about this week's A-level and GCSE results days or workplace romance, text into the studio, tweet us at TT Radio 2021 or call in. Press one of those call-in icons at the top of your screen or the phone icon down the bottom. And bring your headphones to avoid any echo issues and get ready to tune in and talk it out. Thank you, big thank you to Lauren, who's earned herself 50 hearts. 50 hearts by sending us a gift of a mug. Talking of mugs, we have a new delivery of Teachers Talk Radio mugs, notepads and badges thanks to our wonderful sponsors. So if you call in at any point in the show today, you are entering yourself into that competition to win yourself a Teachers Talk Radio mug. I last gave away one of these a month ago, so I'm excited to bring back the mugs. There is a specific opportunity to win a mug during the workplace romance section, so keep on listening for your chance to win that mug, or call in at any time and we'll see whether or not we can give you that mug. In the meantime, it's time for a weekend education news with Joe Fox. Let me know, as ever, your thoughts on the news by texting in or calling in, and I'll let you in after the news has finished. Over to Joe.
This is Teachers Talk Radio, and this is Teachers Talk Radio News.
Following reports of record results achieved by pupils in this year's A-levels, focus has now turned to those who will begin their courses in September 2021. According to an Evening Standard newspaper report, students due to begin their A-levels next month have no idea how they will be assessed at the end of their courses in 2023. For the teens who received their GCSE results on Thursday, uncertainty remains as the government has yet to reveal its plans for the 2023 exam season. These students, due to sit A-levels in 2 years' time, will have never taken high-stakes public exams. It has been widely reported across many media outlets that the government remains keen for exams to go ahead in 2022 and onwards, but final plans have not yet been announced, and it is not known how exams will be graded. There have been some reports that mitigations such as choices of topics may be in place for 2022. But for 2023, there is even less information, leading to further uncertainty for students who have already felt the significant impact of the pandemic. In a related article, the Evening Standard also reports that many education leaders are now demanding more funding to help sixth forms cope with a likely surge in demand for places following this year's GCSE results. The planned £100 million worth of support is being described as inadequate when there are 1.1 million sixth formers already in England. With many schools in Scotland looking to welcome back students in the coming week, the website Social Care Today is reporting on new guidance which has been issued to help schools better support transgender children and young people in Scotland. The guidance contains real-life examples, shares best practices, and gives advice on a wide range of issues such as bullying, safety and privacy. Scottish Education Secretary Shirley-Ann Somerville made it clear that pupils are happier and learn more when they feel safe, respected and included. The guidance aims to give teachers and all staff working in schools the confidence and skills to support the mental, physical and emotional health of transgender young people. Its intention is to provide practical suggestions but not be prescriptive, and takes into consideration respect for the rights of all pupils. Finally, The Guardian newspaper has released the obituary of Susan Reynolds. Reynolds was an academic who changed the way historians think about the Middle Ages. She believed the description, widely taught in schools, of the system as vertical, with kings at the top and peasants at the bottom, was misleading. According to The Guardian, her work has been so influential that a generation of university history students has already dropped feudal from their vocabulary, and suggests that changes to the curriculum will be likely in schools and colleges at some point in the near future. This has been your Teachers Talk Radio Weekend News with Joe Fox.
Live from Nottingham, this is the Saturday Lunch with Tom Hopkins Burke on Teachers Talk Radio.
Welcome back to Teachers Talk Radio. It is 1:10, and that was your weekend news with Joe Fox. I want to hear from you today, so call and text in. What were your experiences of Results Day this year? Did you meet your partner at work? Have you been weirded out by someone else's workplace romance? You know what to do. Tune in, talk it out live on Podbean, because this is Teachers Talk Radio.
Live from Nottingham, this is the Saturday Lunch with Tom Hopkins Burke on Teachers Talk Radio. Tune in live on the Podbean app or desktop player. Just head over to www.podbean.com/LSW/TT Radio or search Teachers Talk Radio. Follow the hashtag TT Radio.
Thank you to Joe Fox for Weekend News. Just a reminder that although our summer schedule is filling up nicely, you can join us as a host on Teachers Talk Radio. Send us an email at teacherstalkradio@gmail.com or DM on Twitter at TTRadio2021, and we will tell you how you can get involved as a show host. All hosts get a 2-show trial and a technical induction. So what are you waiting for? This is my 19th show, and yeah, the first few are a bit nerve-wracking, but once you get through that early period, it becomes second nature, just like teaching. Talking of experienced hosts, a very good afternoon to Emily Forenshow, who is listening live in the studio. A very good afternoon. Let's have a look at some of our other listeners. We've got Tom Rogers in the studio, our founder and director. Good afternoon, Tom. We've got Tim, Chem Commando. Good afternoon, Tim. We've also got PBG91C84BRNBX. A very good afternoon to you, whoever you are. We've got WB1, lots of numbers. I'm not going to repeat. It might be somebody's credit card details or something. We've also got Sam Slater, and I know Sam's done some fantastic work with Edexcel. I've got some of her medicine resources sat behind me on my bookshelf. So yeah, call in, text in, tell me what your experiences of Results Days this year have been. Before we move on to workplace romance, I want to crunch the numbers from A-level and GCSE Results Days. Has there been grade inflation? What's happened to the attainment gaps? And what's going to happen next? Lauren has already said, bring back exams. I want to know what you think. If you had another year of teacher-assessed grades next year, how would you react? Would you quit the profession? I know a few teachers who would. Would you just plod through and just get on with it? Would love to hear from you. Text in, call in. Remember, you've got a chance to win a Teachers Talk Radio mug. Let's start with A-levels, because that came first at Results Day on the 10th of August. And if we start with the headline figures, so 2021, 19.1% of A-level grades were at A star, 44.3% at A star to A. That compares to 2020, when we had centre assessed grades, 14.3% A star, and 2019, 7.7% A star. So we can see there's a higher proportion of A star grades being awarded. And with A star to A, 2021, 44.3%, 2020, 38.1%, 2019, 25.2%. So look at those figures. There's a big rise in the number of A star and A grades being awarded. If you look at A star to C, this is where it gets interesting. There's a smaller rise compared to A star to A. There is still a rise, but it's a smaller rise. 2019, 75.5% of A-level grades were A star to C, about 3 in 4. 2021, 88.2% A star to C. So there's been a rise of around 13 percentage points. And what that's telling us is, whatever you want to call it, grade inflation, whatever you like, it's happening more at the top end with the A stars and the A's than elsewhere. There was actually a rise in the number of U grades awarded under teacher assessed grades, albeit a small one. The pass rate, A star to E, in 2021 was 99.5%. That compares to 99.7% in 2020. I'd love to hear why you think there's been a rise in U grades awarded in 2021. It could be pupils have just missed lots of schooling, and there have been some high-profile examples, I'm sure, in everybody's schools. and people have lacked sufficient evidence to be awarded a grade. I'd love to know, why has there been an increase in U grades? And so there's been these concerns that students' grades are being devalued. But this year's system for awarding grades, Emily says laziness from students. Yes, but it's a very small proportion, isn't it? We're talking about 0.3 to 0.5% of students. So it's only a very small proportion we're talking about. And certainly we've seen lazy, I can think of examples, obviously not naming any names of students who maybe didn't do all of the work they wanted to, but they still came away with grades. We're talking about sort of most extreme examples here. So is it laziness with it might be laziness with, say, D's and E's, but with U's. Emily said, I gave a U because a student didn't give in any work. Yeah, fair enough. If you've got no work, and we've had examples of that, if you've got absolutely no evidence, you can't give them a grade. It's as simple as that. But it's a very small number of cases. This year's variation, of course, system for awarding grades led to variation not only between centres but within centres. I'd love to know whether you've had any conflicts with other departments, other faculties about how they awarded grades, and whether things snuck through some of the quality assurance processes in terms of centre policies, and whether there's any differences. Were some departments giving grades based on a piece of work which everybody did? Was some departments giving grades based on the best piece of work a student had submitted in a particular year? Would love to know whether there's that difference. We've got to think, of course, that this inflation, especially at the top end, is inevitable. I had 2 A-level history classes this year, and I'm going to take one example. One of my classes of A-level historians, there were 9 students, brilliant class, and we knew that 4 of the 9 students in that class were capable of an A-star. And in the work they'd completed over the course of a year, they'd all shown that they were capable of an A-star. Some stronger than others. They'd shown that they were capable of not getting an A-star on a bad day, on the odd homework or whatever. Now, usually, I don't know, tell me about your classes. Have you ever had a class where 44%, 45% of students have got an A-star? They wouldn't always get an A-star. There's 4 students. We'd probably say 2 of them would probably get an A-star out of 9. Somebody would probably have a bad day in the exam hall. You can't predict which student would sleep through their alarm, who would misread a question, who would run out of time. So the point about the teacher-assessed grades process is that no student had a bad day. And that's why the grades are higher, because no student had a bad day. In exams, in the exam hall, some students do have a bad day. But we were basing students really on their, on the performance they did, and far fewer students had a bad day. I suppose they might have been some of the mini assessments. I had a student at GCSE who, I predicted a 9 all the way through. And then on, one of their big papers, which was going to be their top priority assessment, they got 7, and that sort of ruined it for them, and they ended up with an 8 overall. So it does happen. But far fewer students have a bad day in the teacher-assessed grade process. So actually, is this inflation, or is it just a new way of awarding grades? And again, we can talk about the difference between norm-referenced assessment and criterion-referenced assessment. Normally, exams work in a norm-referenced way. Only a certain proportion of students are going to get a certain grade. And this is a way of combating grade inflation. So I had a look at some of the statistics. Over the last 7 or 8 years, I think the percentage of A and A-star grades at A-level was capped at around 25 to 26%. And it didn't really matter how well students performed, although grade boundaries have remained mostly consistent. And I imagine that's just a way of guarding against any particularly easy or particularly hard papers. Now, I want to have a look at October, November 2020, because this was fascinating. I want to know from your schools, did your school use 2020 grade boundaries as a way of awarding grades in 2021? Sam says, I don't think we should be comparing this year with last year. Previous year's assessment was completely different. The problem is that people are going to be comparing between cohorts, employees, universities, and so this process is going to be inevitable. And I understand it's a different system of assessment, but ultimately some schools assess in different ways, and some schools try to mimic as closely to a normal system of assessment as possible. But what I'm interested in is, did you use 2020 boundaries or 2019? Emily says she used 2019 boundaries. And the whole thing about the 2020 grade boundaries, which was the exam sat as resits basically in October and November, of this academic year is that they were a lot lower than previous years. If I look at my paper for A level, the boundaries were out by about 10 to 15 percentage points at the top end compared to 2019, 18 and 17. Sam says we were told very clearly by exam boards to use grade descriptors. There are no useful grade boundaries. I suppose so, but again, schools did things in different ways. And the grade descriptors, I mean, how could, you know, they're no more meaningful, I suppose, than the grade boundaries, in my view. I don't know. It's just very, very difficult. And I think we, you know, from a history perspective, why didn't we listen to the exam boards? Well, I mean, it's a difficult question, but the thing is, schools did so many things differently. It casts into doubt the reliability of these grades which students have got, and you know how meaningful they are. And it's been a very difficult year. And as I'm going to talk about later, we should really be celebrating the students' achievements rather than going on about this. But it's important to look at the numbers in the first place. But these November 2020 grade boundaries were applied to a weaker cohort, and you know the grade boundaries are lowered for that. So actually, it, you know, if you're using grade boundaries as a way of awarding grades, and if you've used, say, a past paper, and you know that a previous cohort has done, you know, you're probably going to end up using those grade boundaries. So it's been very, very difficult, and the waters have been very, very muddied this year. We've gone from norm reference assessment, as we normally do, 2019 and the years before that, basically to criterion reference assessment, which, you know, refers to grade descriptors. We've gone from, well, a certain proportion of students in this country have to get this grade to, if you achieve X out of Y in these papers, you get a grade Z. So, or if you've achieved, I don't know, sophisticated analysis or whatever, or detailed knowledge or whatever it is, and it ties you into a grade. So the number of students getting particular grades isn't capped, and this is why we're in such a peculiar situation. Sam says, I agree that descriptors have allowed for higher grades overall, but it's what we were asked to do. It's the only fair thing to do for the students. Yes, I'm not disputing the fact that these grades had to be higher. It's a matter of fact, and the fact is because we've moved to this criteria-based assessment process, the grades had to be higher. And there's no getting away from that. And there's been a lot of talk about so-called grade inflation. This is a new system. It's different. And, you know, I'm going to be talking about what we do next year and how it's going to affect this cohort, the next cohort, previous cohorts as well. And what about schools which use their own papers? How on earth is that going to work? You know, did you use the exam board papers which they gave to you? A lot of ours were just past papers. We didn't get much new, and we are part of a trust of goodness knows how many schools, and we use the same paper across all of the trust schools. And of course, grade boundaries are for a particular paper set by a particular cohort in a particular year. They can't be transferred to a completely different cohort or sub-cohort, especially if they're sitting a different paper. And I've been thinking just about solutions to what on earth could have happened, but I can't come up with anything which would have worked. And all I can say is that schools and teachers have used their professional judgment. They've created, in most cases, a holistic judgment. I know some schools which have sort of applied some sort of magic formula to their grades. But most schools, in our case, it was a holistic judgment about our students' ability in a way which prioritised fairness. It hasn't worked in the same way as previous systems. I don't think it was designed to. Teachers, of course, have done an incredible job in the most difficult of circumstances. But my view is, and feel free to disagree with me, never again. Let's bring back exams, just for the sake of teacher workload, teacher well-being, student well-being, even though that's quite a difficult thing to say for exams. But genuinely, the exam process, terminal exams at the end of the year, much, 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 much better than this mess which we've had to do. And Sam agrees, absolutely never again. What would... If you listen back, tweet us at TT Radio 2021. Would you go through this process again? Call in, win yourself at Teachers Talk Radio mug if you're live, or text in, let me know what your thoughts are on 2022 exams. Looking at the gender gap, I mean, we're comparing between different cohorts here. Interestingly, at A level, in 2019, the gender gap favoured boys, 8.1% A star boys compared to 7.3% A star. For girls, but 2021 girls, you had girls 19.7% A star in 2021 compared to boys 18.4% A star. So in terms of A levels, the gender gap is reversed. I'd love to know why. Is it a case of girls work hard for mock exams? Should we be stereotyping according to gender? Let me know what you think. But I think it's interesting that the gender gap is reversed at A level. And whereas in 2019, boys got more A stars and more A's, in 2021, girls are getting more A stars and A's and A star to C's. The private and state school gap. Now, this is a controversial subject. We've got Tim in the studio, who I know works in the independent sector. Ofqual analysis shows a 9.3% percentage point rise in the total number of A star and A grades achieved by private school candidates. 70.1% of A-level grades at independent schools were at A or above, compared to 60.8% in 2020 and just 44% in 2019. Selective state schools, grammars, saw an increase of 7.5 percentage points, free schools 6.6, comprehensives 6.2, academies 5.7, and sixth form colleges 3.8 percentage points increase. So everybody's A star and A grades has gone up. There's not a state school in the country which didn't get more A star and A grades than last year. While over 70% of A level grades in independent schools were at A or above, comprehensives figure is 39.3%, still up from 33.1 in 2020 and just 20% in 2019. And so this raises lots of questions really about the independent state gap. Why is this the case? Now, there are long-term reasons, but focusing on the short and medium term, we've got these debates about learning loss and whether students in independent schools were less disadvantaged. That's what Barnaby Lennon, chair of the Independent Schools Council, seems to think. Earlier this year, he told Schools Week that most independent schools saw relatively limited learning loss because they were able to access online learning more quickly. I suppose so, but at the same time, state schools, we managed to transition everything online in the space of 2 days, okay, between being told schools were closed in the first place and, start online learning Monday the 23rd of March, I think it was. But again, I suppose you've got the fact that in the independent sector, more students got access to technology and, maybe more students have access to supportive learning environments. It's not, it's a generalization, of course, and it's not a perfect analogy. It's not a perfect answer, but that's one factor, I suppose. Ofqual's response is independent schools are more likely to have students clustered around the top grades. And so a general increase in grades would most likely benefit students attending independent schools. That's what I'm talking about in terms of the number of A star to A grades going up more than A star to C. And because independent schools are and their results are typically more clustered around the A star and A's, they're going up by a higher, they're sort of accelerating more quickly, I suppose. There are other factors at play. Tim's listening while shopping in Tesco. He's not ignoring me on purpose. I'm not going to throw any accusations at Tim or any other independent school teacher because, like any other teacher, they are true professionals. But I would be interested to know, if you do work in the private sector, what parental pressure did you experience? What pressure from school leadership did you experience regarding teacher-assessed grades? And actually, it's not just for private school staff. If you work at a state school, a state grammar, state comprehensive, academy, further education college, what pressure did you receive from parents or SLT to change or modify grades, up or down? Now, Barnaby Lennon from the Independent Schools Council says the increase is not to do with pushy parents. Tim says none personally. The Sutton Trust found that 23% of private school teachers reported parents had approached or pressurised them about their child's grade this year, compared to 17% at more affluent state schools and 11% at the least affluent. So in whatever school it is, less than a quarter. Sam says works at a state grammar, was put under no pressure at all. I was put under no pressure in terms of grades. I think a couple of students tried their luck but realised very quickly it wasn't going to get anywhere. There is a gap. There is a small gap. Emily, again, is in the same position, under no pressure. There is a gap according to Sutton Trust. But how significant is that gap? The thing which I think stands out more to me is that private school staff were more than twice as likely to have been approached by more than one parent regarding teacher-assessed grades compared to state schools. So maybe there is a bit of significance there. What's more worrying, I suppose, is the attainment gaps for students on free school meals from areas of high deprivation and black candidates. In our school, all staff received unconscious bias training. We received training in terms of how we would apply our sort of holistic judgments to a set of assessments and then producing an overall grade. I'd love to hear from you. Did you receive any unconscious bias training in the process of awarding teacher-assessed grades? The A-star to A attainment gaps have widened between black candidates and white British candidates. The gap has widened by 1.43 percentage points. For free school meals, this compared to 2019, the gap has widened by 1.42 percentage points. And for candidates living in an area with a very high level of deprivation, it's by 1.39 percentage points. For A-star to C, the attainment gap for free school meals candidates to non-FSM candidates widened by 1.03 percentage points. The gap is widening. And the inequality gap for university access has widened too. More students than ever accepting university places this summer. And areas which already had high rates of university participation have seen more gains than areas where few students tended to go on to higher education. It's normally at this point in the summer where in our school we get a list of seeing all of the destinations for our students. Haven't got that yet, but I'd love to do a little bit of analysis on that. The Sutton Trust has shown that entry gaps have increased from 24 percentage points to 28 between the first and the fifth polar quintiles as well. So the pandemic has compounded existing inequalities, but growing gaps between the state and independent sectors and the attainment gaps by different metrics as well. And yes, we should celebrate the fact that more students from less affluent areas are going to university this year. But the gap to those from well-off areas is growing, and that is a cause for concern. And spare a thought for university admissions tutors this year. Whereas 2 years ago, in 2019, 18% of students achieved AAA or higher from 3A levels. This year, 2021, that figure has doubled to 37%. And the ways in which universities will deal with this and are dealing with this, it's fascinating to see from an outsider perspective. And I'm going to talk about that a bit later. The Sutton Trust has requested that universities who are waiting on appeals or taking students through clearing should give additional consideration to students from lower income backgrounds. Would love to know what you think, especially if you work in a particularly deprived area, whether you've seen any impact on university admissions. How have your year 13s found the process of applying for university? Have they been asked to defer? Have they been given a financial incentive to defer? Would love to hear from you. Before we look at GCSE results day, from Thursday, the 12th of August, it's time for a word from our sponsors. Once this scroll bar has scrolled down for me, we're going to have a word from our sponsors. Here we go.
Creative Resources, made for teachers by teachers. At Creative Resources, we've been rethinking what a classroom can be. We've created a huge range of more than 2,500 original and exciting resources that span across more than 15 different subject areas. Whether you're looking for primary or secondary level resources, careers options, PSHE, arts or humanities, Creative Resources have the resources for you. We offer full curriculum packages and unique, challenging escape rooms themed on topics such as Shakespeare, Tudors, and fractions. We have quizzes, task cards, Tarsier puzzles, and lots more. Better still, more than 100 resources can be accessed for free. Just visit our website www.CRE8TIVE.resources.com. You can get 10% off any order you make on our website by using the discount code TTRadio. Creative Resources, made for teachers by teachers. Every teacher loves stationery, right? Imagine getting a selection of fun, beautiful and unique stationery items designed and selected especially for teachers, delivered through your door every month. You need to check out teacherslovestationery.club.
I'm always so excited when the box arrives. It's such a treat.
My Teachers Love Stationery Club box is just a little treat to myself every month.
It's always full of delightful and surprising items, including some really good quality stationery brands like Faber-Castell and Stabilo.
And because you never know what you're going to get, It makes it even more fun and special when you get it.
It feels really great to be supporting a family business that's run by real teachers. I can't help feeling like they just know what I'm going to enjoy using stationery-wise better than I do myself.
Visit teacherslovestationery.club and enter the code TTRadio when you buy your first stationery box to save £2 today. teacherslovestationery.club. Introducing the Leadership Masterclass series by Diana Osagi. Learn how to ditch your fears and develop your leadership confidence. How to deal with difficult colleagues. How to thrive when you lead in a challenging environment. And how to get colleagues to buy into your vision. Join Diana for her online leadership masterclasses starting on the 10th of July and running all the way through the summer. These sessions are the perfect way to prepare and refresh for the next academic year and beyond. Book your place at courageousleadership.co.uk/events now. The first 50 leaders to sign up get an additional free mini coaching session with Diana herself. Don't miss this. Courageous Leadership Masterclasses at courageousleadership.co.uk/events.
Welcome back to Teachers Talk Radio. It is 1:36 p.m. and you are listening to the Saturday Lunch Show with me, Tom Hopkins Burke. A very good afternoon to all of our first-time live listeners in the studio, including Goody and Greg. A very good afternoon to you, and of course, a lot of our loyal listeners still here as well. Time to look at GCSE results now. Grade 7 and above, 28.9% of all grades were grade 7 and above in 2021. Under centre assessed grades, that was 26.2%. So a small rise from 2020. And again, mirroring the A-level results, passes at grade 4 and above rose, but by a smaller margin, by 0.8 percentage points. What interests me is the number of students getting straight 9s in 7 or more subjects. In 2019, it was 837. 2020, 2,645. 2021, 3,606. That's a 330% rise in just 2 years. We saw the gender gap widen. So for girls in 2021, 33.4% of results at grade 7 or above. For boys, 24.4% of grades at grade 7 or above, so a gap of 9 percentage points. So again, the gender gap is widening, similar to A-level, except in A-level in 2019, the boys were actually ahead when it came to A Star and A. And the gap between the state and independent sector is profound. In private schools, 61.2% of grades were at grade 7 or above. In comprehensives, 26.1%. In academies, 28.1%. And that gap has widened by 7 percentage points in 2 years. The regional variation is what is interesting, and a big thanks to BBC who break this down for us. The regional variation in GCSE results this year. If you look at London, 34.5% of grades were at grade 7 or higher. 34.5 in London. In the South East, it's 31.9. I teach in the East Midlands, just 25.1% of grades were at 7+. In the North East, it was 24.5%. In Yorkshire and the Humber, where I trained, 24.4%. Now look at grade 4 and above, or as I'm going to call it, the pass rate. Back to London, the pass rate, 79.7%. I know it's not really a pass rate because if you get a 1, 2, or 3, it's a level 1 qualification, but I'm going to call it the pass rate for level 2. Sake. In London, it's 79.7%. In the South East, it's 79.3%. But in the East Midlands, it's 75.4%. And in Yorkshire and the Humber, 73.5%. And again, these gaps in regional variation are higher at grade 7 and above compared to grade 4 and above, which is suggesting that those students clustered in the top grades have benefited most from teacher assessed grades. But the regional gaps, I think, are still profound, and it lends itself to the analogy of the postcode lottery. Where you live could just have an impact on what grades you got. What's creating the north-south divide? I'd love to hear your thoughts. Call in, text in. I know we've got a lot of teachers in London and the southeast in the studio at the moment, and we've also got some teachers who teach, in the north or the Midlands. So I'd love to hear your thoughts on what's creating this north-south divide. Did lockdown play a role? Did experiences of homeschooling play a role? Can that alone explain the regional variation in schools? I don't think so. What do you think? In terms of the other inequality gaps, free school meals pupils to non-FSM pupils, the gap increased by 2.27 percentage points at grade 7. At grade 4, it widened, but only by, I say only, but by 1.31 percentage points. For SEND, the gap has widened by 2 percentage points. For students with a Gypsy, Roma or Traveller background, the gap continues to expand. When looking at the top grade 7 and above, the gap grew by 2.29 percentage points. But at grade 4, and this bucks the trend of everything else we've seen before, the gap is wider. For Gypsy and Roma students compared to white British students, the gap has widened by 6.25 percentage points at grade 4. And for travellers of Irish heritage, the gap has widened by 9.29 percentage points. That's the untold story, I think, and I'm definitely going to have a guest on to talk about how best we can support our students from a Gypsy, Roma or Traveller background, because that, I think, will be the untold story of these results days. In terms of why gaps have increased, well, it's pandemic versus the change in assessment arrangements. Which do you think has had a greater impact? Again, texting, call in. I've still got a Teachers Talk Radio mug to give away. So which do you think has had a bigger impact on the growing attainment gaps, COVID or the move to the teacher assessed grades process? And what are we going to do in 2022? Should we move back to 2019 grades and disadvantage future cohorts? Or should we permanently rebase the 2020 grades or 2021 grades, which would disadvantage past cohorts, 2019 and earlier, but ensuring that nobody else is disadvantaged? Would you disadvantage students of exam years past to save students of exam years future? Or do you let the trolley hurtle down the track to hurt students who will be sitting those exams in the future, to protect the prospects of those who have moved on to new things already? Sam Friedman's very knowledgeable about these sorts of things. He wrote a paper for the Institute of Government last week, which set out the options for future years. He recommended that results be permanently rebased to the standard seen in 2020 under centre-assessed grades. And so the grade inflation would be baked in to the system. But he admits that Ofqual, and I didn't know this, Ofqual has a legal duty to maintain standards. And so the most technically correct approach would be to go back to the 2019 results as a benchmark. So it'd be much lower outcomes from 2020 and 21. But also, as Sam says, because of the impact of a pandemic, it'd probably be worse outcomes than 2019. And the disadvantages would continue as well, because the 2022 cohort would be competing for jobs and university places with the 2020 and 2021 cohort, which had a more generous system for awarding grades. Sam Friedman does not recommend using 2021 grades because they are so high as to make the university admission system potentially unworkable. And we've already seen the impact that this year's A-level results have had on university admissions. The University of Exeter is offering medical students holding offers for September this year £10,000 and free accommodation for a year to defer their place to 2022. And the University of Leeds is doing the same for law and business students. Last year, universities offered £1,000. This year, £10,000. Absolutely extraordinary. Imagine you were 18 and you were offered 10 grand and 3 years worth of accommodation to hold off going to university for a year. Would you take it? I would. But it's not really about me, it's about you. Would you? Let me know. Text in, call in. If you were 18 and you were offered £10,000 and a 3 years worth of accommodation to defer for a year, would you take that offer? I would. Would you? What about the system? We've already had a couple of listeners text in to say, bring back exams, teacher assessed grades, never again. One recommendation from Sam Friedman's report is to create a resilience strategy for future years, so that the school system is better prepared for future crises. So one example could be to have essays written earlier in the course where appropriate and marked using comparative judgment. Is that too similar to modular exams? Let me know what you think. Would you be in favour of maybe having assessment points earlier on within courses to reduce the burden and reduce the pressure on those end of course terminal exams? Call in, text in if you're listening back, tweet us at TT Radio 2021 with your thoughts. Another recommendation was reverse the abolition of AS levels. Would you bring back AS levels? I don't really know what I'd do with AS levels. Those, you know, if you're teaching and you've been teaching longer than me and you did teach during AS levels, would you bring them back? Are things better or worse now than they were before? Let me know what you think. So yeah, I mean, I'm going to go to Jeff Barton now, who's always got a good view on these things. He says exams are a different way of assessing students than teacher assessments. The former, exams, is essentially a snapshot of performance on the day a student sits an exam and tends to favour students who are good at exams. And the latter is a more holistic judgment, which takes into account a range of evidence. There are pros and cons to both approaches. There's a good argument for using a greater range of assessment methods in the future, which blend both approaches. Is that something you'd go along with? A greater range of assessment methods, not just terminal exams, which have, according to Jeff Barton, created far too much pressure in the system and on young people. How far do you agree? A greater range of assessment methods, is that something you'd consider? What would these look like in practice? Why not call in and tell me? And of course, what about moving to a numerical system? A lot of people have said it would help with data analysis and Excel, having numbers as grades instead of letters. And of course, you can rather than with letters at A level, you can introduce more numbers at the top end to combat grade inflation. How long do you think it will be until we're awarding grade 10s at GCSE? I give it 2 years. But yeah, a numerical system at A level, what do you think? I've spoken for a long time now, about half an hour, my word, on the number crunching and the statistics. But let's have a look at I'm going to look at 2 stories which are very heartwarming from Results Day. I'm going to start with Clive Rowe. Clive is not your ordinary GCSE student. He's 58 years old, and he took courses at City College, Plymouth during the pandemic. He's a popular big issue vendor in Plymouth, and now that he's achieved his grade 5s in English language and maths, even though he studied maths for just 4 months this year, he's now one step closer to achieving his dream of studying creative arts at university at the age of 58. Now, Clive grew up in the care system and foster homes. He had a difficult childhood. He was in detention centres at the age of 14, and he went on to battle addiction and homelessness. He's been selling the big issue for 14 years. And he's a very popular figure in Plymouth with his dog, Geezer. He's also taken on acting classes, started productions, and participated in theatre programmes. He started attending college in 2019, and he's been honoured with a pink plaque outside Plymouth's Theatre Royal as a local community champion. So for you, Clive Rowe, a big round of applause from everybody at Teachers Talk Radio. One final story which came to my attention was from one of Clive Hill's tutees in Derbyshire. Now, Clive was one of my earliest guests on Teachers Talk Radio. He came on 4 months ago now, on the 17th of April. And he shared the story of Jason Ledford, who, despite spending more than a year in hospital, being unable to walk, talk, or even open his eyes as a result of complications from surgery and a brain tumour, achieved 2 grade 5s and 4 grade 4s and a merit. In 2019, he was diagnosed with his brain tumour. Days later, he underwent an 11-hour operation and then another 11-hour surgery. He was tube-fed and required radiotherapy every day for 6 weeks, followed by 6 months of chemotherapy. He's now going to Derby College to study health and social care to enable him to become a nurse after being inspired by those that cared for him. What a brilliant, heartwarming story, and so good for Jason that he's able to go on and do what he wants to do with a fantastic set of GCSE results considering his circumstances. So another big round of applause for Jason. We're going to go to a break now and a word from our sponsors, but afterwards I'm going to be talking about workplace romance. Let's go.
Every teacher loves stationery, right? Imagine getting a selection of fun, beautiful and unique stationery items designed and selected especially for teachers, delivered through your door every month. You need to check out teacherslovestationery.club.
I'm always so excited when the box arrives. It's such a treat.
My Teachers Love Stationery Club box is just a little treat to myself every month.
It's always full of delightful and surprising items, including some really good quality stationery brands like Faber-Castell and Stabilo.
And because you never know what you're going to get, it makes it even more fun and special when you get it.
It feels really great to be supporting a family business that's run by real teachers. I can't help feeling like they just know what I'm going to enjoy using stationery-wise better than I do myself.
Visit teacherslovestationery.club and enter the code TTRadio when you buy your first stationery box to save £2 today. teacherslovestationery.club.
That's enough of that then. Nick Grimshaw hosted his final BBC Radio 1 show last week on Thursday. He's been on Radio 1 for 14 years, but he's still only in his 30s. Doesn't feel like 14 years since he first took over. If you want to feel old, ready for this, when Nick Grimshaw first hosted his show on Radio 1, I was still in primary school. How about that? Good news, Tom Rogers. I'm not going to be replacing Nick Grimshaw on Radio 1. Tempting though the offer was. And I don't think, unless Tom knows anything different, Nick Grimshaw is going to be on Teachers Talk Radio anytime soon. Although with the calibre of guest that Kate Jones is able to attract, don't rule him out from being a guest anytime soon. Nick Grimshaw wanted a challenge, so he left after a whopping 14 years. A few weeks ago now, I asked why teachers move on and what's stopping them from moving on, even when they wanted to. So go back a couple of Saturday lunches once you get a chance and listen back to what I had to say on that. I talked about longevity being a factor in terms of teachers wanting to move on for a new challenge, but also the fact that being at one place for so long and progressing up the pay scale means they're less employable elsewhere. And so even if they want to move on, that's a factor which is stopping them. I'm not sure whether Nick Grimshaw's ever hosted a show on romance in the workplace, but if he has, I'll be emulating him on today's Saturday lunches, because that's what I'm going to be talking about. A career in teaching can be more than just a job. It can be a lifestyle, and teaching has the power to shape your lifestyle and your identity, even when you don't want it to. It's an intensive job. So many teachers can't stop thinking about teaching. And, you know, we're now summer holidays and we've been talking about teaching. And if you're listening to Teachers Talk Radio, you enjoy your job and you're passionate about your job, and great to have you. And so it's no surprise when teachers end up in relationships with other teachers. Now, on Wednesday, Nathan had a fantastic show. He had his sister, it might have been 2 Wednesdays ago now, he had his sister Sophie on as a guest, and they were talking about them having parents who were teachers, because both mum and dad were teachers. It's no surprise, really, because teachers have so much in common with one another. The trials and tribulations inside and outside of the classroom, the marking, the parents' evenings, the holidays. The 2012 American Community Survey found 40 million opposite-sex married couples in the United States in which both members had a job. From these 40 million married couples, just over 12% shared the same occupational group. Agricultural workers and animal breeders were found to have the highest rate of within-group marriage at 25%. Maybe there's a rural factors there. They're more likely to live in a rural community where there may be a less diverse range of occupations. Fourth in the list of being married from the same occupational group was education. Interestingly, 77% of the education workers in this survey were women. And so what that meant was the most likely men to marry somebody with a similar occupation were men working in education. Not women, not for women, but for men. Over a third of men in education, as part of this survey of 40 million worker couples in America, over a third of men in education with a partner who worked were married to a woman in education. And teachers' abilities to charm parents over a phone or at parents' evening makes wonders with the in-laws, I reckon. And of course, they're great with kids. There is a market, of course, for teachers dating teachers. Look at Tom Rogers, founder and director of Teachers Talk Radio, the genius entrepreneur, set up EduDate, a dating agency open to anyone working in education, not just teachers, but teaching assistants, administrators, site staff, librarians, trainee teachers, and retired teachers. EduDate now has a database of more than 4,000 single school staff, and they even offer a priority option. I'm keen to hear from you whether you've used EduDate and if it has or hasn't worked for you. I know there have been plenty of success stories. You also have other dating apps, but it can be quite difficult to find teachers on these, apparently. Tinder, Bumble, Hinge, apparently the top 3 dating apps these days. It's been about 3 years, I think, since I've been on Tinder, so before I went into teaching. Teachers quite rightly don't want students to know too much about their private lives. And even though you have to set your age as a minimum 18 on these apps, it doesn't stop 16, 17-year-olds creeping on there. Teachers, like anybody who uses these apps, can set limits on the ages they wish to match with, of course, but there's still a fear from some teachers that students could find them. I had a little Google around and I found these message boards of teachers complaining that students were finding them on dating apps. So it does happen. And of course, teachers do have to be very careful about what they reveal online. I'm sure every school these days has a social media policy. And I'm sure that the vast majority, if not all teachers, set their privacy settings all the way to 11. And so, you know, it's difficult for teachers because teachers do struggle to make time for their dating lives. COVID has got in the way, certainly, but so is the grind of being a teacher. We wake up early, work all day, some evenings, some weekends, and after a working day, we are pretty exhausted. It's why so many teachers fall ill in the first week of their summer holidays, like I did. We've battled through the weeks at the coalface, mainly powered by adrenaline and caffeine, and after all of that, our bodies just shut down. We're too tired to socialise, let alone date. But today, I'm not talking about the sort of things which EduDate or dating apps offers you, which is meeting teachers from a different school or a different city. Now, I'm talking about romance within a school, within a staff room. 2 teachers who work in the same school in a relationship with one another. Now, before we think about workplace romances involving teachers, I want you to text in and give me an example of a famous workplace romance in popular culture. Let's start with my favourite, and the one which bears close resemblance to the sort of things I'm going to be talking about today. It's Tim Canterbury and Dawn Tinsley from the UK office Tim and Dawn. Now, the problem with this was, of course, that Dawn in the office was engaged to Lee. Not sure about his surname. And Lee, of course, worked in the warehouse. They were high school sweethearts. Their relationship was one of convenience, and it was clear they'd been together for a while. It wasn't a particularly romantic relationship. Lee, very reliable partner, but not romantic type at all. And Tim and Dawn strike up their sort of friendship and bond in the office. They're pulling pranks on Gareth Keenan, and they're belittling David Brent. There was always a certain uneasiness, I think, to anybody watching about this friendship, as if they both knew they wanted something more, but it was unattainable. Tim, of course, for a bit put this aside by flirting with Rachel, who came with the Swindon crew. But there's a sense that those two weren't entirely comfortable together. And of course, Tim dumped Rachel, found out that Dawn was leaving for America with Lee, and that's the moment when Tim took the plunge and asked out Dawn. Awkward. She said no. And so off Dawn and Lee go. They'd patch things up. They'd go off to America. leaves everyone a bit embarrassed. Lee more than a bit cheesed off as well. And then fast forward to a final episode. The great thing about the UK office is that they didn't let it drag on. They ended it at the perfect opportunity when everybody was so engrossed in it, and they didn't wait for it to decline. Perfect timing. And Dawn and Lee arrived back in the UK for a Christmas party. Clear at that point their relationship was not great at all. Lee said that Dawn had given up her art for good. Dawn's goal, of course, was as a children's illustrator. Tim's gift to Dawn? An oil painting set with a note that said, "Never give up." And at that point, Dawn leaves Lee, goes back to Tim. They embrace each other on the dance floor. They all live happily ever after. Maybe they do, I don't know. You've got the US office equivalent too. Thank you to Nathan, of course, who produced the graphic for my show today, who put Jim and Pam on there. But Tim and Dawn will always be the original. Of course, Jim and Pam actually get married in their version of the office, the US one, and the wedding's at Niagara Falls with the whole office in attendance. You've also got Grey's Anatomy. You've got Derek, Shepherd, McDreamy, and you've got Meredith Grey. Derek is head of neurosurgery at Seattle Grace Hospital. And he meets Meredith Grey and has a one-night stand. And of course, he then finds out that she's an intern in the hospital. And as they develop feelings for each other, it gets a bit awkward in the workplace. Most of Derek's family members accept the relationship, but not all of them do. And of course, in the meantime, Derek's got a wife who eventually moves to Seattle and is offered a job in the same hospital. So that's an example there of your past catching up with you. And throughout Grey's Anatomy, the relationship is very, very rocky. They take time to date other people. They get married in series 5 by writing their vows on post-it notes. They then legalise their marriage in series 7 to adopt Zola, a young orphan with a spine disorder. They briefly separate. They get back with one another. Meredith gets pregnant. Derek breaks his promise that he would ease back on his workload by going to work in Washington, D.C. To participate in the brain mapping initiative. Meredith refuses to move the family. Derek moves to Washington in the heat of a moment. They talk things out on the phone. And then in series 11, Derek's killed in a car crash and Meredith's pregnant with another child. That's a very sort of rocky relationship which lasts for 11 series, and famous example of relationship in popular culture. What about House of Cards? Remy and Jackie begin working together, and they use each other. They try to extort something from another for their own personal professional gain. And those long hours working together leads to flirtation, it leads to sleeping together. Their secrets and their respective agendas begin to bleed into their relationship. What could they tell each other? What couldn't they tell each other? There's another example there. And of course, at the end of series 4, Jackie gets married, doesn't she? She gets married to Alan, who brings 2 stepdaughters because she's a politician and she thinks having a husband and a family is going to help her. And so Jackie and Remy agree just to be friends. Late night talks, confide in one another. But at the end of series 4, Jackie leaves Alan and goes to Washington, and they don't return for series 5. Again, a relationship surrounded by intrigue. Most workplace relationships aren't like these, hey? They're all fictional, those examples. They're scripted, they're simply not real. And quite frankly, I think they're a bit too exciting for us teachers. What about some famous real-life office romances? Not popular culture, but real life. I'm going to start with Michelle Robinson. Michelle Robinson worked in a Chicago law firm where she was one of 2 African-American employees. The other one, Barack Obama. And so Barack was infatuated with Michelle. And Michelle didn't get that love at first sight initially, even though Barack did. And Michelle said it would look tacky for the only 2 African-American employees at the firm to start dating. And eventually, though, she relents and they went and saw a movie on their first date. And 3 years later, Barack and Michelle were engaged, and a year later, they were married. Another famous real-life workplace, this one's a bit awkward, I suppose, Bill and Melinda Gates, because, of course, they separated and finalised their divorce only this month. But they met each other at a press event at New York City in 1987. Bill, at the time, of course, being the Microsoft CEO, and 22-year-old Melinda, a Microsoft employee. Melinda originally plays hard to get. She thought dating the CEO is a bad idea. It probably is. Fast forward 6 years, and they're engaged. The Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation, even though they've divorced, will continue. But 27 years of marriage later, they said they no longer believe they can grow together as a couple. And of course, it's worth remarking about the allegations of questionable workplace conduct from Bill Gates' early years at Microsoft. A spokesperson does say they are untruths, and we don't want Bill Gates to sue Teachers Talk Radio. Let's say these allegations are not proven. But representatives of Bill Gates have admitted, of course, that he had a romantic relationship with another Microsoft employee 2 decades ago, in the year 2000. And a spokesperson said there was an affair almost 20 years ago, which ended amicably. And yeah, that took place before Microsoft had a policy requiring employees to disclose workplace relationships, which has been in place since 2006. Now, this is your opportunity to win yourself a Teachers Talk Radio mug. Fantastic opportunity here, because I'm going to be asking you about Steve Easterbrook. Is that a name you have heard of? Steve Easterbrook. As a result of his workplace relationship, he was fired from his job as a CEO. But can you tell me where? This is an opportunity for you to win yourself a Teachers Talk Radio mug. If you can call in and tell me what company Steve Easterbrook was CEO of before he was sacked for his workplace relationship, I will award you one Teachers Talk Radio mug. You've got until the end of the show to do that. And a little bit of a clue. His employer said that while his relationship was consensual, he had violated company policy and shown poor judgment by dating an employee. Now, Steve Easterbrook earned $16 million a year in his position as CEO. As a severance package, he got 6 months' pay, and Bloomberg estimated he would leave with more than $37 million, most of which would be previously granted shares. Now, as a result of this incident, the company's top HR officer also resigned. Steve Easterbrook was appointed chief executive in 2015, and he was divorced. So it wasn't an affair, but it was still a conflict of interest with a power imbalance. In August last year, the company took further action against their former CEO. They accused him of lying about the number and extent of his relationships with subordinate employees and seeking to recover his severance package. They claimed that Easterbrook had sexual relationships with 3 women in the year before he was fired, and awarded one of his employees stock options worth hundreds of thousands of dollars. Easterbrook was also accused of using his corporate email account to receive and send photos and videos of various women, including the 3 alleged relationships. Now, if you can tell me what company he was CEO of, you can text in, call in, you can win yourself a Teachers Talk Radio mug. I did ask people online as well on Twitter about any workplace romances, real or fictional, they could think of. Got a few on my Twitter. I don't have time to go through them today, but I'm going to talk about workplace romances now involving teachers. I went through the archives of The Guardian to find some examples of teachers dating teachers. So my first example is Mike and Anwen O'Hara, married for 4.5 years and been together for 10. Now, Mike and Anwen met each other during teacher training. One of Mike's friends asked him to help her with an IT project. He invited her and some friends to his student house for drinks and went from there. They've been on supply in the same school together where they said they'd annoyed each other. Anwen overheard a classroom assistant telling a friend she thought Mike was attractive. Awkward. They've managed to not talk about work all the time by watching shows like Bake Off, but they find it difficult not to talk constantly about work. Next example is Lorna and Jonathan Deakin, been together for 4 years, and she was married when he started teaching. He'd sometimes teach in her classroom, and so he'd come to kick her out, and sometimes they'd have a chat. They commuted together, and so they had a rule that if they needed to mouth off about work, that until they reached the bridge on the motorway, they called it the Bridge of No Return. Love it. They were asked whether they'd work together again. This is where it gets awkward. She said, I wouldn't actively seek it. He said, I would certainly work for Lorna. Oops. There's also Kelly and Tamsin, not their real names, who at the time of their interview were engaged and together for 4 years. Kelly needed advice on a lesson, and everyone said Tamsin was lovely and helpful. But Tamsin told Kelly that she was too busy and that she should work it out herself. Later on, Kelly found out she was funny, creative, and when she didn't have 1,000,001 things to do, she made time to support colleagues. Tamsin said that staff were always supportive of their relationship and were excited about the wedding. And Kelly said it was a bit of a team effort in getting us together. When the kids asked them about their relationship, Kelly never told them formally, but she never denied it either. Isn't that nice? So do teachers share the good things that happen in their days with each other, not just the bad stuff? Teacher couples, that is. Very keen to hear from you on that. If your partner's a teacher, do you talk about all the good things which happen at work and not just the bad? Text in, what do you have to say about that? Do you just talk about the good, bad things, or do the good things make an appearance as well? So let's talk a bit more about teacher romances in schools. Now, first of all, there's a few obstacles that you have to deal with. Firstly, you have to deal with the inevitable staff room gossip. That is, of course, if your teachers do use your staff room. And in many schools where teachers have their own classrooms and are overworked, the staff room can be pretty vacant. But you will have to deal with that period of staff room gossip. Most likely, it'll be based around curiosity or even excitement, but it could occasionally give way to malice. If you don't fuel this fire, that gossip will eventually fade. Interestingly, 75% of people who became involved in a romantic relationship in a variety of jobs and sectors tried to hide it. In 82% of cases, their co-workers found out anyway. So be upfront to avoid the gossip. Be honest and just get on with it, okay? It's best to be upfront. I wouldn't post anything about a relationship in the workplace on social media, though, just to be safe. Your privacy settings might be locked down, but can you really trust your Facebook friends? So unless you want your staff room winking and nudging each other, I'd keep it away from social media. And of course, it's not just the teacher, your fellow teachers who are going to be curious. You can guarantee that a student will find out. Imagine the horror if they saw you in public holding hands. My advice to any teacher, let alone teachers dating other teachers, live a fair way away from your students. You minimise the chances of being spotted in public. Just live a few towns away. A survey of 5,795 UK workers revealed that 51% were concerned about gossip with regard to a workplace relationship. 1 in 3 said they felt judged by their co-workers for their relationship. 1 in 6 said they got made fun of, and 1 in 10 said they were discriminated against as a result. Lauren says, horror, I live on a 9-mile by 5-mile island. I have no choice. Yeah, that doesn't sound great. I live about, 10 miles away where I work, but a student lives a mile up the road apparently, and I've got absolutely no idea how they did it. So yeah, you try to hide from them, but it can be difficult. Once things get serious, you do want to go public, obviously. Most workplace romances don't actually get serious for long. Most last between 1 month and 4 months, apparently. But of course, if a relationship does become serious, you're going to have to let people know in a professional capacity. It could be line managers, maybe your department, maybe you're probably going to be HR. And it's always best to control how news gets out, I find. Do you want your closest colleagues to hear about it from casual gossip, or do you want them to hear directly from you? And if you avoid the gossip, you avoid, those whispers where your details get manipulated or twisted or spun. You always want to be in control of how the news spreads, but don't feel the need to make a whole staff announcement in the morning briefing. You need to keep it professional. I went for dinner with a few colleagues last week, and one of them was telling me about the time they caught two colleagues snogging in one of the classrooms. That's pretty unsavoury, eh? For the benefit of everyone involved, I'm going to leave it at that. Yes, for you, it might be a romantic thrill. For everybody else in your facility, it's pretty disgusting. I've got no idea what some caretakers have seen at work. But, you know, they've probably seen just about everything, much of which not on the job description. And of course, the question is, what happens when you break up? It depends how loved up you were in the first place, but who's going to deal with the fallout? Can you share a staff room together? Are you sick of the sight of each other? Heaven forbid you work on a project together again. But stay professional, keep it cool. Difficult though it might be. It was your fault it happened in the first place, so it's up to you to manage the consequences. And I suppose it's why so many teachers are not even close to being willing to entertain a workplace romance, because they usually go wrong. So there are plenty of obstacles that could scupper a staff room romance. But in many cases, these obstacles don't actually stop them from happening. Office romance is alive and well. These statistics might surprise you. They're American, but they're still surprising. 58% of US employees have engaged in a romantic relationship with a colleague. Workers over the age of 50, that rises to 72%. 41% of US employees don't know their company's policy regarding office romances. Do you know your school's policy or your trust's policy? Does your school or Multi Academy Trust have a policy? Do you know that? Almost 1 in 5 employees who are in a committed relationship have had an affair with a colleague. A surprising 44% of employees have known colleagues who have had affairs at work on business trips. These are relationships that employees would rather keep secret, so it does create problems down the line for those organisations who want to maintain professionalism in the office. 64% of employees who have participated in an office romance have kept it secret. This is where suspicion and the gossip arises. And I suppose you don't want HR getting involved in your love life, but it is important to tell people, tell co-workers, including your superiors. Only 16% were comfortable enough to do so. And I suppose, yeah, if there's problems, if it's not going to last for long, it's about working out when you're going to say, isn't it? I thought I'd look at the social psychology next. Why are we attracted to work colleagues? I mean, it's not everybody, obviously, but it's still a fair few people. You know, 75% of people, of UK workers, have had a crush on a work colleague and have kept it secret. Social psychology gives us a few answers. A 1968 study by Robert B. Zajonc, I think, at the University of Michigan, saw college students presented with photos of faces. Participants saw the photos of some faces up to 25 times, while other faces were shown just once or twice, demonstrating that mere exposure to someone can increase our attraction to them. The more the participants saw a photo of a particular face, the more they reported liking it. In a similar study in 1973, participants had short face-to-face contact with one another. More exposure meant more attraction. So repeated exposure to the same co-workers day after day can have a similar effect, and it feels more attraction at work. And as teachers, we spend more hours per day with our colleagues than we do anybody else. It's no wonder that people form close bonds with their workmates. David Brudo, CEO and co-founder of the mental wellbeing app Remente, told The Independent that most adults spend a minimum of 1,680 hours a year in the office. So you're more likely to spend more time with your co-workers than almost anyone else. And of course, co-workers have something in common, don't they? Their work. And Brudo continues, while you do not have a say in who your co-workers are, chances are you will have common interests. The nature of teaching means that that is as much a factor as for any other profession. Teachers attract teachers because many non-teachers struggle to comprehend or accept the work patterns, which some teachers, not all, have to put up with. You've got the matching holidays, you've got the emotional highs and lows, and I suppose it brings people together. You get to know somebody at work in a way that simply isn't possible on swipe right dating apps like Tinder or Bumble or Hinge or whatever. Mike McNulty, who's a therapist and relationship expert at the Chicago Relationship Center, says it may well be more workable to marry someone who shares the same kind of schedule, rather than having to constantly explain the demands of your position to a partner or spouse who works in a different profession. And the fact that your partner's in the same role, it may mean you can relate to each other's experiences, especially when it comes to the unprecedented challenges of the last 18 months or so. But there's something particular about teachers. Sergio Escorial, a psychologist in Madrid, found the strongest correlations for partnering were in the categories of openness, agreeableness, and conscientiousness. And research shows that teachers as a group have those traits in abundance. And education academic Geert Keltermans of the University of Leuven in Belgium argues that more so than in any other profession apart from medicine, the behaviour of teachers reflects emotional involvement and moral judgment, and their emotional reactions to their work are intimately connected to the view they have of themselves and more. So teachers as a group share some very attractive personality traits, and this makes them very marriageable. So you've developed a crush on a workplace colleague. You're going to see them every work day. What is your best way of handling this? Here we go into the meaty bit now. You might choose to take stock of your options. You've assessed the risks, whether it's mutual or whether you rejected. You decided you don't want to be exposed by other colleagues. You don't want to have to deal with management. You don't want to be knocked off a promotion track. You might decide you want to act on your feelings without dealing with those risks. As a result, you might hold off until you've moved to a different place of work before betting your job satisfaction on the crush. But if love conquers job, you do you. You might choose to proceed by flirting, but remember, you're in a school, you're in a staff room. Keep it cool. You can show them behaviourally, though, that they are on your mind. Being thoughtful, but extremely subtle. You don't want to be overt, and you certainly don't want your actions to be interpreted as sexual harassment. So the little things, you know, you might find out what their favourite chocolate bar is, and then you might put one on their desk. Or you find out they play for a sports team on a certain day of the week, and you ask them how they got on the following day. Keep it subtle, keep it suitable. The problem is, of course, you know, as a person, I'm thoughtful and caring. As a habit, doesn't match up with any romantic interest. I just genuinely care about people. So I'm always asking after people. I'm always being friendly. I'm always being polite. You might be on the receiving end as well. So yes, it can be misinterpreted. Of course, they might not be remotely interested in you, and that's absolutely fine. If you invite them to something outside of work, like a drink, you can work it out from their response. Easy peasy. Big difference between workplace camaraderie and romantic chemistry. And, you know, it's difficult to straddle your work life and your personal life. And of course, you know, not all crushes are reciprocated. If your workplace crush doesn't want to go out for a drink or doesn't want to do it again, that's fine. Don't push it. Yes, it will be awkward in the staff room, but you'll forget about it soon enough. Don't make them uncomfortable. Give them plenty of space. You can still be friendly. You can still be thoughtful. You might feel dejected. You might want to limit your encounters with them. But hey, life happens. I've got a couple of anonymous stories I'm going to share with you now. First one is from, again, these people, these aren't their real names. This is Dan, a British teacher in his 20s. And here's what Dan had to say. I got drunk in the pub on the last day of Christmas term. Also in attendance was a colleague I had a crush on for ages. At the time, I thought revealing this fact to her was a brave and romantic thing to do. When I woke up in the morning, I was so mortified that I thought I might never be able to go back to work. Thankfully, we had 2 weeks off. Later that day, I got a message from her. I apologised for being so forward, and she said it was fine. We should go for a drink over the holidays. So in the gap between Christmas and New Year, we went on one of the most awkward dates I've ever been on. I arrived late because my bus was delayed. The bar we went to was playing really bad music really loudly. And we ended up spending lots of time in the evening walking around in the cold trying to find somewhere else that was open. But the worst part was that we had nothing to say to each other. We struggled for a couple of hours of awkward chat before calling it a night. We exchanged some polite texts to say we'd be better as friends, and we haven't really said more than a hello to each other since. I suppose that's the danger of being too open, eh? But hey, it could have gone worse. I've got one other as well, which I'm just trying to find, but I can't quite find it, which is fine. I'll move on because I want to talk about power imbalances in workplace relationships. Your relationship may be happy and healthy, but it can lead to accusations of favoritism for your subordinate. And so it's wise for employers, not least schools, to prevent employees from managing, supervising, or being involved in employment decisions that affect an individual with whom they're romantically involved. A total jobs survey of over 5,000 UK workers found that women dating their manager would be more likely to take a career hit compared to a man dating their manager in terms of promotions, bonuses, salaries, and even relationships with other colleagues. Another survey, this time by the job search engine adzuna.co.uk, found that 75% of UK workers were open to the possibility of dating a colleague, and 1 in 3 people were infatuated by someone in a higher position within the company. 22% of people who have dated someone in the workplace did so with the boss. You know, and 48% of workers who dated their boss admitted their romance helped their career. But you have to think about the other 52% for whom it made no difference or was, in fact, it had a negative impact. There was a great article in Forbes, of all places, about the role of HR in office relationships. It cited a study by the Society for Human Resources Management, which found that companies which had an explicit work romance policy, 99% prohibited romances between superiors and subordinates, mostly because of concerns around harassment, favoritism, and conflicts of interest. Google, as a company, has explicitly discouraged any relationships between superiors and subordinates. I suppose the question's over to you. Anybody in your place of work where that applies? Think about the optics to the rest of the staff room, the staff body. If it happened in a school, it wouldn't look great. I want to finish this segment because I'm very short on time with this thought from the Adzuna survey, which I cited about a minute ago. 21% of workplace relationships resulted in separation. 1 in 3 workers have left a job or role to avoid an ex-partner after a breakup. And 1 in 4 have left their job to give their relationship the best chance to succeed. So approach workplace romance with caution. It can work out, but so many of them don't. Is it ever a good idea? Well, there's no hard and fast rule. Be careful about how open you are in the workplace. Put yourself first. Take great caution when it comes to power imbalances. And maybe, just maybe, your workplace crush feels the same way about you as you do about them. I'll get back to you on that. We are now approaching the end of today's Saturday Lunch. I've got 3 minutes to go. A big thank you to you for listening along. Thanks to everyone who's texted in or tweeted us at TT Radio 2021 with your thoughts on the show. I couldn't do it without you. If you're listening back, tweet us at TT Radio 2021. Use the hashtag TT Radio. Let me know what your thoughts are on workplace romances and on A-level and GCSE results day. Tomorrow, we've got 2 shows. Number 1, Sobia Iqbal is back at 9 a.m. after 2 weeks away. She's talking about brain fog, revenge, bedtime procrastination, how to rest and recuperate properly, and self-care for men. Dr. Hareen Otieno, Africa's own education doctor, is back at 3 p.m. tomorrow with the afternoon show. She's joined by Erica Kruger, and she will be exploring practical strategies and tools for Africa's teachers to improve their mental wellness. Now, the show next week, which stands out for me, is with Lucy Newberger. It is the Tuesday Twilight Show at 6 p.m. She's going to be talking about dating as a teacher. My segment today focused on workplace romance and the impact on staff room dynamics and whether it does and doesn't work. Lucy's focusing more on finding the time to date people from outside of work as a teacher. So it'll be a cracking show, a slightly different spin. I'm really, really looking forward to listening live at 6 p.m. BST on Tuesday. If you're looking for something new to do during these summer holidays, take the plunge, apply to host your own show on Teachers Talk Radio. You get a 2-show trial, you get a full tech induction. So DM us at TT Radio 2021 on Twitter. You can fill out the contact form on our website, ttradio.org/contact, or send us an email direct at teacherstalkradio@gmail.com. We are keen to promote a wide range of voices. So don't worry if you think your style is completely different to me and all of the other hosts you've listened to so far. You have the chance to create your own style. Now, next week, I'm not quite sure what I'm going to be talking about. I haven't got planned that far ahead yet, but I would like to talk about the 4 following topics in future Teachers Talk radio shows. So if you are listening back or listening live and you want to talk about these with me, send me a DM on Twitter at HB_history, or on Instagram at HB_history. And we can talk about one of the following things. Number 1, being an effective form tutor. Number 2, the importance of field trips after COVID. Number 3, supporting pupils from a Gypsy, Rabbit or Traveller background. And number 4, using historical fiction in the classroom. And if you want to talk about something completely different, that's absolutely fine. Let me know too. DM me on Twitter at HB_history. That is it from me today. Enjoy the rest of the weekend. Enjoy the rest of your summer holidays. Next week, it will be my 20th Teachers Talk radio show. Tune in and talk it out.
You've been listening to Teachers Talk Radio. Tune in live and listen back at ttradio.org. We look forward to hearing from you next time on Teachers Talk Radio.